Aliens, giants, advanced pre-flood technology, we are diving deep into the great unknown with a Christian author, researcher, and explorer who is challenging us to look at the Bible from another perspective. You're watching a special edition of Get Free with Christy Lee. The sword of the Spirit. The Bible is crucial, a crucial element to our armor of God. Its truths can encourage us and draw us closer to our Creator, but it's also exciting to see how truly aligned with science and history God's Word is. For an analytical person like me, learning answers to the whys and the hows can strengthen your faith and resolve. I don't believe we have to have blind faith, but we can seek and even speculate on God's great mysteries. Our guest today, Timothy Alberino, has been called the Indiana Jones of Christianity, but prefers just to be known as an adventurous Christian seeking the truth. He is the author of Birthright, offering a revolutionary perspective on the biblical narrative, which is helping to inform and expand the paradigms of Christians living in an age of artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and UFO disclosure. We're going to spend the next hour learning about his fascinating background and theories. So welcome in, Tim. I'm so honored to have you with me here today.
Well, the honor is mine. Thank you for having me.
You bet. So we'll have like maybe just shy of an hour, and that's truly not enough time to delve into some of these topics, but hopefully we can at least introduce some of the concepts. And, I'm just going to see where it takes us. But I want to start with your background, just in case there are some that aren't familiar with you. My husband's very familiar with you. I just recently became familiar. I kind of got introduced to some of the concepts we're going to discuss with Steve Quayle, Chuck Missler. But yeah, I've really been enjoying listening to you. So what's fascinating with your story is you up and left at 18 to another country. You want to explain how that happened?
Yeah, when I was 18 years old, I dropped out of high school, and ultimately, by the time I was 19, was living in the Amazon basin of Peru. And I explored all over the country and lived among the people there, and was deep in the Amazon for a long time, and living with indigenous communities, and then also high up in the Andes, just kind of wandering around for a while.
And how did it come to be that you decided to do this? Were you already a Christian and then you went, or did that come later?
Yeah, I've been a believer all my life. My father was a pastor. I had a very good upbringing. And that was certainly part of the impetus that drove me, let's say, into the jungle, was this ardent desire to know God, actually to hear the audible voice of God. I wanted to have a burning bush experience, but that's kind of a different story. And that led me as a young man into the jungle. But again, that's a very long, convoluted story.
I see. And so some of the topics that we're going to talk about today, I feel like some Christians are threatened by. And I can kind of understand that to a degree, because I find that when I've dug into some biblical interpretations, sometimes it can get into the New Age and mysticism, and then it gets all mixed up. Have you faced criticism from maybe the traditional Christian point of view with your interpretation of certain things?
Not nearly as much as I thought I would when I published my book. Really very little, I would say. I interface mostly with people who enjoy my work, and they may not agree with all of my points, but at least they appreciate that I express them in an academic way, or at least attempt to be scholarly in the things that I write. And so there's some disagreement, I'm sure, on different points that I make in my book, and the things that I discuss. But as I said, I really thought there would be more contention, and there really isn't. I think in a lot of the things that I say, I think logic is on my side, So there's probably widespread agreement on most of what I talk about.
And that
At least
might
in the
make,
community of people who follow me. Let's put it that way.
yeah. And this might make more sense as we dig into some of these theories, but I wanted to, before we did that, just hit a couple more recent news elements, if you will. You know, we just recently had this eclipse. A lot of people were speculating some kind of spiritual significance to when this eclipse was happening. There were some biblical coincidences, we can say, as far as the pathway through many Ninevehs and a Jonah. And, you know, so there's a lot of speculation there. What was your stance on if there was any significance or what?
Oh, I'm sure there probably was some kind of significance, but there was also a lot of fake news. And whenever I see something explode on social media like this eclipse stuff, I'm very wary. I pump the brakes. And it's usually the information that you see on social media is usually going to be a mix of some facts, interesting facts, but also a lot of misinformation and fake news. For example, there was attached to all of the eclipse hype, there was this prevailing idea that CERN was turning back on during the eclipse, and there was a lot of, as I said, there was a lot of hype around this idea that the Large Hadron Collider is going to be switched back on, and it's being coordinated to happen with the eclipse. That was false. There was some technology that they were testing, some new technology, but they tested it a few days prior to the eclipse, and it was just completely blown out of proportion. So there were a few things that, and I've on my YouTube channel and website and stuff, I've corrected the record on some of those things. But having said that, I do think there's something significant. There's something uniquely significant about this eclipse. But exactly what it means and what it points to, I don't know.
Okay. And then also, I guess, newsworthy in recent months has been a lot of like a resurgence of talking about aliens. But it's been weird. It's been kind of back and forth. You know, there was the whistleblowers, and then there was like they tried to almost bring it back with a report that came out after that, basically trying to debunk everything the whistleblowers were saying. No evidence of alien technology in new UFO report is what you see there. What's interesting about this to me is I feel like on the one hand, people are saying, oh, it's all just a distraction because there's all things that they don't want us paying attention to. So this is just, they're allowing this to come out as a distraction. And then also there's an element that I have tended to agree with up until this point, that there's not really such thing as aliens, but it's more just demonic activity. Obviously, as I'm learning more, that I'm open to other ideas, but how does this concept of aliens, how can you marry that with the Bible and Christian faith?
Well, there's no need to marry it with the Bible, because the biblical text unequivocally introduces us to extraterrestrial beings who are both extraterrestrial and alien. In fact, these beings are known by the ambiguous designation of angels, and the word angel, of course, is not it does not give us any information into the nature of the being. It's just a occupational descriptor. It's malak in the Hebrew and angelos in the Greek, and it simply means a messenger, an envoy, one who is sent. But when we get insight into the entities who are being described with this term, to whom this appellation is being applied, oftentimes in the Bible, not always, sometimes angel refers to human beings actually in the biblical text. Then we find other very interesting terminology, such as the sons of God. We read, for example, in Job that the sons of God shouted for joy when the foundations of the earth were laid. Well, that presupposes two facts. It presupposes that the these sons of God are not human beings, because the foundations of the earth are being laid. There are no human beings yet, and it presupposes that they pre-exist, that they are rather, that presupposes that they pre-exist the human species, and that they are from an extraterrestrial realm or world, however you like it, because the earth is being created, the foundations of the earth are being laid, and these beings already exist. So I think the biblical narrative clearly presumes the existence of extraterrestrials. We happen to call them angels, and they're known by other appellations in the scriptures. But there's no need to marry anything. It's presumed in the text, in the narrative. There's a place called the kingdom of heaven. These sons of God that are not part of the human species, they come from somewhere other than planet Earth. And the term extraterrestrial simply means, and let's be specific to sentient beings here, because we could talk about amoebas and bacteria and things like this. Let's be, as I said, let's be specific to sentient beings. Extraterrestrial simply means beings whose provenance or origin is not planet Earth. That's it. So we can then examine these sons of God, these angelic beings, and we can ask the question, is their origin, is their provenance planet Earth? And the answer is clearly no. Therefore, they are, by definition, extraterrestrial. The word alien is a little bit different, because alien doesn't necessarily require a being, an entity, to be from an extraterrestrial world. You can have alien beings inhabiting the Earth. You can have, for example, beings who are inhabiting the interior of the Earth, who are not the human species, who are sentient, who would be alien to the human species because they're not part of our race. So I think both extraterrestrial and alien are accurate designations for some of these entities that we encounter within the biblical narrative. So again, there's no need to try and align the idea of extraterrestrial beings with the Bible. It is presumed within the narrative.
So am I to take it that you mean that you think that extraterrestrials or aliens, they're always fallen angels? Because that's what I understand sons of God to be. And now would probably be a good time to start differentiating between these terms and learning some of these different terms. But is that what I'm to take your understanding of what
First of all,
aliens are?
the term fallen angel is a contrivance. It's not actually a biblical term.
Okay.
The concept is a biblical concept, certainly. I prefer to refer to them as the apostate sons of God. They were once members of the kingdom of heaven, and they defected. So they are in a quote unquote fallen state. So all of the sons of God are pre-existent to the human species. They pre-exist us. So they're all from somewhere else, and they've existed in the universe long before Adam, I believe, long before the creation of Adam and Eve. So that presumes, by the way, a civilization. Indeed, when we read about the things that these angelic beings do, it's difficult to conclude anything other than they are hailing from a civilization. They are members of an advanced, they're citizens of an advanced civilization. That is not an earthly, is not a terrestrial civilization. It must therefore be an extraterrestrial civilization. And indeed, I think that this place is called in the scriptures the kingdom of heaven. And I always ask this question. It's a question that most Christians don't contemplate much, but I think it's a very important question, and it's a very provocative question. And it is, does the kingdom of heaven have locality? Is it a place? Can you get there? If you had infinite technology, could you go to the kingdom of heaven? Or is it just a concept? And a lot of people would retort with, well, Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is within us. Well, I think that's actually a mistranslation. I think really what Jesus is saying is the kingdom of heaven is near to you. because he was there. And wherever the king is, there is the kingdom. So I believe that the kingdom of heaven does indeed have locality. It is somewhere located within the universe. That seems to be the most plausible. I think the most plausible and reasonable conclusion is that God created this universe through his son. It's this vast place, and it was created to be inhabited, not just by us, but by the other beings that he also created. And again, we know that he created other beings, sentient beings beside the human species, aside from the human species. We encounter them in the scriptures. They must be living, abiding somewhere. They must have an abode somewhere that's not the earth. And of course, there's this argumentation of whether or not this abode is a spiritual place. Is it an extra dimension, or is it somewhere? Is it a physical place within the universe? It really doesn't make a difference as it pertains to this notion of extraterrestrials, because whether it's a spiritual place other than the earth, whether it's some sort of an extra dimensional realm, or whether it's has physical locality within our universe, the beings that come from this place are certainly not terrestrial.
And it just made me have a thought. I've heard the thought that, or the theory that the Tower of Babel wasn't an actual tower that they were building. It was more like just a play on words. Do you believe that they were trying to build something or discover something, Tower of Babel, if you will, to get to the kingdom of heaven, since that's what you're just talking about?
I mean, there's a lot of conjecture around what they were doing with the Tower of Babel. Certainly, first of all, they were engaged in open insurrection. They were purposely defying God. God said, "Spread out, multiply, fill the earth," and they were doing the exact opposite. They were coming together. They were consolidating all of the people together to build a city. That was literally the opposite of what God told them to do. So that's the first problem. Were they attempting? Did they believe that they could maybe penetrate into heaven somehow by building a very tall tower? That would be a very what could we say? That would obviously be a very ignorant view. If people who actually think they can build a structure and get up into heaven, I don't think that's what they were doing. Was it some sort of a temple that they were going to perform ritualistic magic and try and call down the gods or make contact with the gods? Probably. I would say that's probably true. They were obviously in a state of rebellion and apostasy at this point, and were, as I said, openly defying the dictate of God, which was to do the opposite of what they were doing. So there's a whole lot of conjecture and speculation out there about what they were actually trying to achieve with the Tower of Babel. I don't subscribe to some of the wilder ideas, but certainly something ritualistic, trying to contact the gods, trying to invoke the gods. I would say I certainly would subscribe to that idea.
Okay, and like I said, I do want to get into definitions of these different things, but I want to take a quick break before we do that. Something else that's been around forever, that's a tangible, physical thing, is gold, and it's very important that you get your hands on it. Watch this. Get free with Christy Lee, and that includes getting free from tying up all your money in the banks we can no longer trust,
greed works,
the market, which can face manipulation, and getting ahead of any central bank digital currency schemes that might be headed our way. In times of uncertainty, the wisdom of diversifying with gold and silver shines brighter than ever. Genesis Gold Group offers a path to invest in these precious metals, echoing the biblical principles of wisdom and preparation. So go to GetKLGold.com to get your free gold and silver guide and get started. That's GetKLGold.com. All right, we're talking with Timothy Alberino, and I think it's important to start defining some of these words to try and understand these very deep topics. Now, you were talking about the sons of God, another creation that was in existence before Adam and Eve that the Bible actually references. And then I used a term fallen angel, which you do not like that term. But now I need to define between that and a watcher, because it's my understanding that would be tend to be the same thing. So maybe help us with that.
Well, yeah. So you have, by the way, in my book, Birthright, I because the terminology is so ambiguous in the biblical narrative, I refer to this angelic race as the elder race because they are certainly older than we are. They pre-exist us, and how else should we describe them if not a race? So the elder race is what this general term that I use to describe the angelic race that pre-exists mankind, that is clearly present in. Now, the portion of that, there's some group among this race, among the elder race, that defected from the kingdom. This is clear. They are now the enemies of God. They are, as the Bible puts it, princes without a kingdom, and they are in opposition to God, in opposition to those who are loyal to the King of Heaven. These are the enemies of the kingdom of heaven. I think it's interesting, by the way, that Jesus says the kingdom of heaven suffers violence and the violent take it by force. That indicates it indicates martial conflict. And I think that's Jesus is intimating to martial conflict that's ongoing in the kingdom of heaven with this group that is adversarial, who, of course, the New Testament designates as the devil and his angels. So that group would be those fallen angels, or apostate sons of God, because they are sons of God. Now, in regard to the term watchers, many people, when they hear that term, they think it's an extra biblical term because most Christians are not familiar with the term watcher. Actually, the term watcher features prominently in the book of Daniel, in a very interesting scene in the book of Daniel, in which the council of heaven is passing judgment on King Nebuchadnezzar, who is, of course, a very defiant king and an adversary himself of God, of Yahweh. And Daniel is functioning as the intermediary in this scene between this council of heaven, who are called the holy watchers, the watchers of heaven. And it's these watchers who are passing judgment. They're sitting in judgment over Nebuchadnezzar. And it's very interesting because obviously these are the good guys. These are holy watchers. They're part of what the late Dr. Mike Heiser would say would define as the divine council. And so this is biblical terminology, the watchers, but it's not new. It wasn't new. It doesn't show up for the first time in the book of Daniel because it's rife throughout extra biblical texts, the Dead Sea texts, for example. The book of Enoch, famously, the story of the watchers is the story of a particular company of watchers, apostate watchers, is detailed in the book of Enoch. And this particular group of watchers, they defected from the kingdom, probably a completely separate group from, again, using the New Testament terminology, the devil and his angels. This is a separate group of watchers who defect from the kingdom, and they end up coming down to the earth and causing all kinds of havoc. Now, the term watcher, Irin in Aramaic, it simply means those who are wakeful, or those who watch, or those who guard. And I believe that watcher is synonymous with the cherubim, because the cherubim are guardian, they're throne guardian beings. I don't, by the way, believe that cherubim are actual creatures. I don't think they have four faces and wings and eyes all around. I think that is entirely symbolic. Those depictions fall within prophetic iconography. They fall within the context of prophecy. So it's a vision, it's a dream, right? It's not to be taken literal. So I believe that these beings, watchers, are a particular rank among the sons of God. These are the princes, because this is another term that's used of sons of God. These are the princes in the kingdom of heaven. They're the guardians of the kingdom. And who knows how many there are, but certainly in the book of Enoch, there's 200 are designated. And again, these particular watchers defect. And once you have heavenly beings who defect from the kingdom of heaven, they are now adversarial, right? They're quote unquote fallen angels. So I'm not super excited about the term fallen angel, but I do agree with the connotation that these beings have defected. They've fallen from the kingdom of heaven. Fallen, sometimes people imagine wings when you talk about fallen angels. Angels do not have wings, by the way. There is not a single verse in the Bible that is not within the context of prophetic iconography that's actually in the narrative that depicts angels with wings. That's a misconception. So I think they use technology. I think they use advanced aerospace vehicles as a means of transportation. The good guys and the bad guys, by the way. So watcher, getting back to the watcher designation, it's just a particular appellation of a rank of a higher. It's a hierarchical term that designates certain members among the sons of God. The princes, the guardians of the kingdom, those who are wakeful and watchful over the kingdom and over the affairs of the king. They are the watchers. So, and again, I think the term is synonymous with cherubim. But that's my opinion.
And right. Another theory that I've heard thrown out is that demons are usually considered fallen angels or apostate sons of God, if you will. But a theory that I've heard is, and we haven't gotten into this yet, but once we get into the Nephilim, the result of humans and the watchers consummating, I guess you could say, that demons are actually, like, when they died, since they weren't human, that those spirits had to go somewhere. I mean, that's what we know as demon. But what are your thoughts? I mean, is demon a totally separate thing? Is it the same thing?
Yeah. So there's two things we have to parse two things here. We have to parse the Western Christian view of demonology and the ancient Near Eastern Hebraic view of demonology, because they're two different things. In the Western view, demons are any kind of adversarial, grotesque creature that is non-human and an enemy of God, an enemy of the kingdom of heaven. Sometimes they get associated with fallen angels, although they're two very different things. But within the Western Christian ethos, demons have a completely different. They're defined in a much more broad way than the narrow definition of demons in the biblical text. So let's set that aside for a moment, the Western view, and let's focus on what is the ancient Hebrew view. We might say the biblical view of a demon. And the idea of a demon derives from the story that we just referenced of the watchers that's recorded in the book of Enoch. First Enoch, by the way, the Ethiopic Enoch, which is sometimes referred to. And as you mentioned, that story relates this very interesting scenario in which the watchers defect from the kingdom, 200 of them. They descend to the earth and they copulate with human women, and the women conceive and give birth to giants. And according to the book of Enoch, as judgment, when the giants are as part of their judgment, as part of the judgment of the watchers and their offspring, who are called, by the way, the Nephilim. So the hybrid offspring of the watchers, these are hybridized beings who were the result of, let's say, the DNA of the watchers and the DNA of human women. The combination of that DNA created a hybridized being who the biblical text and the Dead Sea Scroll text designate as Nephilim. That's what that term refers to, and they were giants. And so according to the book of Enoch, as the judgment upon the watchers, as a judgment upon the watchers and upon their offspring, when the Nephilim died in battle or in the flood, they were condemned. Their spirits were condemned to wander the earth as bodiless, disembodied vagabonds. So these are actually called evil or unclean spirits in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we find this exact terminology in the New Testament, where Jesus and his disciples are encountering unclean spirits. These are indeed the very same. We know that they're the very same because in the book of Enoch, which, by the way, was discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Enoch, as part of the judgment, there's the Nephilim are so the spirits of the Nephilim are wandering the earth as bodiless vagabonds until the day of judgment, when the great judge appears to judge the earth at the end of the age. So this is why when we encounter, for example, when Jesus encounters the Gadarene demoniacs, these, depending on which gospel you're reading, the individuals or the individual who is possessed with this host of demons called Legion, this is why when they see him, the great judge, the Son of God, they recognize him and they come and throw themselves at his feet. And they say, "We know who you are, Son of God. Why have you come to judge us before the appointed time?" Well, that links back to the book of Enoch, because the appointed time is the end of the age. They knew it wasn't yet the end of the age, but yet here is the judge walking in the flesh. And so their reaction makes sense. It's completely coherent if you understand the Enochian tale. So those unclean spirits, according to ancient Hebrew cosmology, the spirits of the Nephilim, the disembodied Nephilim from the antediluvian world, from the world before the flood, are the unclean spirits, are the demons in the New Testament. So that word demon really is very specific. The definition is quite narrow. In Hebrew cosmology, it points directly and solely to the offspring, the disembodied offspring of the watchers, the Nephilim. So the disembodied vagabond wraith spirits of the Nephilim are the demons, the unclean spirits in the New Testament. They are not the watchers themselves. They're not the fallen angels. They are just the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And by the way, the term Nephilim does not apply to angels. It only applies to their hybrid offspring. And Nephilim does not derive. There's a popular misconception, and I'll refer to the work of Dr. Heiser on this as well. There's a popular misconception that the word Nephilim derives from the Hebrew verb nephal, to fall. In other words, the fallen ones. That's actually a misconception. It derives from an Aramaic word, which means giants, and it is transliterated. It's not actually a Hebrew word. It's transliterated into the Old Testament as Nephilim, and so it means giants. And so Nephilim refers to the offspring of the watchers, the hybrid giants who were the offspring of the watchers, and demon refers to those same beings, but in a disembodied condition, in a wraith-like condition. These unclean spirits are the demons.
I think that brings a lot of clarity, because I think all those terms are interchangeably used, and that helps us understand in what little way that we can a little bit more. I'm going to take another quick break, and then I want to get into, hopefully we'll have time to get into some talk about the flood. But yeah, here's a quick break, word from our sponsor. Time to get some beef while you still can. Speaking of, genetic manipulations, which we may get into, you don't want that for your meat. So watch this. Let them eat bugs, they say. or lab-grown meat or worse. No, we want our real beef. And we need to get free from the rising costs because the prices are skyrocketing. So you need to go to klbeef.com, stock up on all American beef from ranches in Texas, from Prepper All Naturals. We don't want the mystery meat. This meat is no mRNA jabs ever. It's freeze dried, stored in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers for maximum shelf life. We're talking 10 plus years without refrigeration. We're not talking jerky. We're talking about something you can just soak in water for 15 minutes, ready to eat. And these are premium cuts: New York strip, tenderloin, sirloin, chuck. Just use promo code KLB15 for 15% off your order.
Meet Jim and Mary, a seasoned couple who have weathered the storms of life and have witnessed the evolution of our great nation. Today, they embark on a journey that's as important as any they've faced before, exercising their right to vote. They belong to a generation that built this country, fought for its values of faith, family, and freedom, and now they worry if their votes will truly count. But fear not, Jim and Mary are members of AMAC. As AMAC members, they can rest easier knowing that AMAC is at the forefront, fighting to reduce potential election fraud. AMAC stands tall, advocating for voter ID, opposing ballot harvesting, and scrutinizing the risks of mail-in ballots. Stand with Jim and Mary, join AMAC today, and let's preserve and uphold the values that make America strong. Because your voice matters, and so does your vote.
All right, we are racing through some of these concepts, so I really want to encourage you to go to timothyalberino.com and make sure you become a member so you can really dive in and dig into all this stuff. But we're going to try and hit as much as we can in the little time that we have left. I want to make sure that we hit the flood. So I've always been able to wrap my mind around that pre-flood was an advanced society, because we have children's books and everything that make it look like that it was like caveman era, but it just doesn't logical make sense. These people had better genetics. Obviously, we've been deteriorating. These people lived a lot longer. It just makes logical sense that they were much more advanced than us. But to that end, I used to think that this whole concept of this integration of if you will, of the apostate sons of God and humans, since I had my mind wrapped around that this was an advanced society, I'm like, oh, surely they were just test tubing it. You know, they did something, went beyond, and they created this being, and that was obviously the ultimate sin, and God had to wipe them out with the flood. But you and I've been hearing ever since that no, like we are to literal take that it was a consummation. But I do still have a hard time wrapping my mind around that, because if it was angels essentially mating with humans and they produced giants, like how would that even work? Like physically, were these big huge things having relations with us tiny disgusting humans? It's really hard to wrap your mind around.
Right. And what we're discussing here is a foundational element, really the substrate of human, of Hebrew cosmology. You cannot separate the notion of the sons of God intermingling and indeed copulating with the daughters of men, producing these illicit creatures called the Nephilim that were never supposed to exist, that were an infraction. It was a great transgression for them to do this and to bring about the existence of these very wicked giants. And as incredible as it sounds, as I said, this is part of the substrate of Hebrew cosmology. And you find it being repeated, you find it being referenced, specifically the book of Enoch, by the way. You find it being referenced in the New Testament several places. Jude references verbatim, actually. He quotes verbatim from the book of Enoch. Peter references the angels who kept not their, or rather, Peter references the angels who are chained up in gloomy darkness, and so referring to this very same story. So there's no question in the Hebraic cosmological worldview that the impetus of this transgression was lust. The angels, according to the book of Enoch, in my book, I delineate three motives. There's three motives that the Watchers have for defecting from the kingdom and descending to the earth. First, this is what I refer to as the first cause: lust. The children of heaven lusted after the daughters of men. This is apparent in Genesis 6. They saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. They desired to take them as wives. The book of Enoch is even more specific. They lusted after the daughters of men, number one. So they desired to copulate with them, but they wanted to do so, number two, within the covenant of a marriage. They were not looking for prostitutes. They wanted wives. And indeed, the book of Enoch describes what they did. They arrived on the summit of Mount Hermon. They descended into the plains, and they began to choose each one a wife from among the daughters of men. And then what did they do? They married these women. They married them. They bonded with them in matrimony. So that's the second motive. They wanted to marry these women. And then, and actually, let me back up. That's actually part of the first motive. They lusted after these women. They wanted to copulate with them and marry them. I would say that's the same, wrapped in the same motive. The second motive would be, and this is apparent in the book of Enoch, that they wanted to procreate offspring. They wanted to have children. So they wanted to marry the women, copulate with them, and procreate offspring. That's the second motive. The third motive, those two motives are directly apparent in the text, in the I would say in the biblical text, but also in the extra biblical text, the Dead Sea Scroll text. The third motive is inferred. The third motive is dominion of the earth, and that takes a long time to break down, and it's really the premise of my book, Birthright, is dominion of the earth. They wanted to usurp Adam's dominion on planet Earth, and that has to do with the procreation of hybrid offspring that were human enough to inherit the birthright of Adam. What is the birthright of Adam? Dominion of planet Earth. That's apparent in Genesis, both before the flood and it's the deed of the earth is bequeathed to Adam, so to speak, and then it's reiterated. The dominion of mankind is reiterated after the flood to Noah. So those are the motivations of the Watchers. That's what they did. This is what's referenced in Genesis 6, and it's what is elaborated in the book of Enoch and other extra biblical texts.
And so where does you've mentioned in some of your other podcasts that I've listened to, bringing it back to the aliens, the Greys, where do the Greys fall into all of this, all of these definitions?
Well, that's a big jump forward. I do not believe that the gray aliens have anything to do with Nephilim. My definition of Nephilim is very narrow. It is the offspring of the Watchers and the human women, and those offspring happen to be giants. Gray aliens is a whole nother. It's sort of to some extent, it's a disconnected topic in the sense that I don't believe the Greys have have anything to do with Nephilim. However, they very well might have something to do with the apostate sons of God, who are still active in the earth and are still opposing the kingdom of heaven and have their own plan, their own strategy. I believe that they are under the impression that they can be successful in opposing the kingdom of heaven, and that there's some sort of a victory strategy here. Of course, those of us who read the end of the book, so to speak, know that there isn't a path to victory for the devil and his angels, only to utter defeat. But I think that ultimately the disclosure of what I call the alien presence does fit into the strategy of the adversary, the dragon, that serpent of old who was in Eden, the beguiler of Eve, as I call him in my book. I do believe that there is a association there between the Greys. It may not be a direct one, but I posit several different. I posit several different ways in my book that there might be an association between the dragon and grays. Now, and it's important to return back to the concept of extraterrestrials and aliens, right? So we've established, or at least I've attempted to establish, that the concept of extraterrestrials is presumed within the biblical text. It's not read into it. It is presumed within the narrative, very obviously presumed. So it is, because it's already built into the narrative, we know that the human species is not the only sentient beings in the cosmos, in the universe. In fact, the best place to start when conceptualizing extraterrestrials and aliens is in the anthropocentric versus Christocentric worldview. See, most Christians have an anthropocentric worldview in which they envision mankind, the human species, at the center of the universe, that everything that's happening in the cosmos is happening for us. It's revolving around us. That is the I would say the general worldview of your average Christian. But it turns out that that's an unbiblical worldview, because the biblical worldview is a Christocentric perspective. And the Christocentric perspective places Christ, the Son of God, at the center of the universe. Everything that is happening revolves around him. Indeed, the universe was created through him and by him and for him. That's very important. It was created for him. He is the center, the epicenter of creation. All things revolve around him. It is his story, not ours. He is the primary protagonist in the story. We are ancillary characters in his story, as are the other sons of God. All other sentient beings in the universe are ancillary characters, are secondary characters in the story that's about the Son of God. The creation was clearly created by him and through him and for him. That's emphasized by Paul in Colossians. It's emphasized by John in the book of John. So this is the correct view. The biblical view is is a Christocentric perspective, not an anthropocentric perspective of the universe, a Christocentric perspective. And once you adopt the correct biblical view, a Christocentric, you take, and you can imagine it as a giant wheel, and the hub of that wheel, you take mankind out of the center of that wheel, out of the hub, and you place Christ there instead, the Son of God. And we are one of the spokes on this wheel. We're one of the characters in his story, granted a very important piece of this story, a very important player in the game. So important, in fact, that the Son of God did something unique. He became one of us in order to redeem us. He did not die for the angels. That's clear in the biblical narrative. So you have, in this cosmology, this biblical cosmology, you have a universe which is likely teeming with life. Certainly there are other sons of God. Adam, by the way, was a son of God. According to the genealogy of Jesus of Nazareth, Adam was a son of God. He was created to be a member in the family. And the great tragedy of the human story is that because of sin, we have been sundered from the family of God, divorced from the family. We were created to interface, to interface, communicate, commune with God and with the other members of his family. And that is the purpose of the human species, and to govern the earth. I would say there's a twofold purpose: to have friendship with God and to govern the earth, to be a part of the family. We were supposed to be members in that family. But as I said, the great tragedy is that we've been sundered from that family because of sin. We all know the story of Adam and Eve. And so, but there are other members, and there are other members in this family. That's clear in the biblical text. It's also clear, by the way, in the parable of the prodigal son. See, there's an older sibling, not just the younger sibling, not just the prodigal who goes and wastes his inheritance and becomes destitute. There's an older brother that's always in the family. And I believe that is a clear indication that bespeaks of our elder siblings, the other sons of God who pre-exist us. and who are, David says, you have created us, mankind, to be a little lower than the heavenly beings. But we were supposed to be part of the family. And the good news is that through Christ, because of he redeems us in the cross, he reconciles to the Father, which means he brings us back into friendship with the Father, and he restores us to everything that was lost in Adam. So everything that was lost in Adam is regained in the second Adam, in Jesus, the Son of God, the Son of Man.
I mean, that's the true point of the whole story. But it sure is fun to speculate and see the evidence for a lot of what you're talking about in God's Word and in the extra books that were found at the same time, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if we had time, we could dig into that as well. But I do want to take this time to remind people that this is so deep that you really need to get a copy of Timothy Alberino's book, Birthright. I need to start reading it too. I'm so excited that you mentioned that you're going to have an audiobook of that, because that's probably, with an infant, that's probably the best chance I'm going to get to really dig into that book, is audio. And also check out his website that we have pulled up right now, timothyalberino.com, because you can become a member and you can watch some episodes that haven't even been released yet, of his true adventures. About the only thing I might have time to hit is, and I want to make sure that we do, is the flood. And again, with the flood, I have, up until this point, had a different understanding of it. I thought it was biblical to think that the flood, everything that was happening was so terrible that God had to just completely wipe out everything. And so that's why I've struggled with the whole concept of giants. Well, like, how did the giants reappear, in the David and Goliath story, if God wiped out everything? And so I guess the way up until this point that I've thought is like, oh, well, it was still in the gene somewhere and it like popped up or whatever. But you've had some different thoughts on this, even to the point that not necessarily everything was wiped out, because we still have these megalithic structures and things like that would have come from a more advanced society, an Atlantean society, if you will, which again, if you'll dig deeper in with Timothy Alberino, he can explain how real that is. But how can you, in short, explain that it's, I mean, I have a hard time with that, because I feel like the biblical understanding is that he wiped everything out.
Well, it's a paradox. It is a paradox. And there are a number of plausible solutions to that paradox, but it all depends on how you view the flood, first of all. We make an assumption that the only accurate biblical view of the flood is that it covered every single mountain peak. The waters of the flood covered every single mountain peak on planet Earth. Mount Everest was under water. That is considered by many to be the only accurate biblical view based on the text. That's just not true at all. There are plenty of good scholars who subscribe to a local flood theory, a local flood hypothesis, in which the entire world that was known to the people at the time, in other words, the Fertile Crescent mainly, was indeed flooded catastrophically. And by the way, these scholars can make just as strong as an argument from the terminology, from the Hebrew words that are used and the meaning of those words. It's just as strong of a case as those who subscribe to a global flood in which every single mountain was underwater. So people need to be aware of that. There is no consensus there. There does not exist a consensus among scholars that the flood covered every square inch of planet Earth. That's the first thing. But so you have a global flood, and then you have a local flood. I'm actually in the middle. I'm flexible, but I'm in the middle. And I subscribe to a global cataclysm, but not necessarily every square inch of the earth covered in water. I think that the cataclysm was absolutely devastating. It was global. It was pervasive all over the earth, and it manifested in many forms. If you were living on the coastal areas of the sea or rivers, your civilization would have been utterly wiped out from floods, from tidal waves and floods. If you were living more in the interior of the land, you would have been suffering from all kinds of depredations. You would have been suffering from all kinds of terrible things resulting from the cataclysm, including extensive biomass burning, wildfires, because I believe that the catalyst of the flood was, in fact, a comet impact. That's my personal opinion. And regardless, whatever the catalyst was, there are several things that need to be accounted for in the flood story. For one thing, we know that the Bible says that all of the land all the creatures that breathed there that died, perished, except for Noah and his family and the creatures that were on the ark. But what about the marine creatures? If you flood the earth, if you take the oceans, for example, and flood them with billions of gallons of fresh water, it changes the salinity of the water. Obviously, it's going to dilute it. And there are many creatures who live in the ocean who would instantly die. Creatures that you can't take an ocean going species and drop it into a tank of fresh water and expect it to survive, and vice versa. You can't take a bass that you caught in your backyard and throw it in the ocean and expect it to survive. Those are different environments. And so it would also have logically resulted in the death of all marine life if every square inch of the earth was covered underwater. So there's problems with that view. And I think a local flood or a global cataclysm hypothesis, they don't have those same problems. So that's why I would subscribe to either a local flood or certainly a global cataclysm hypothesis, but at least a local flood hypothesis. And again, this is not anti-biblical or an extra-biblical idea. There are plenty of good scholars out there and good scholarship to defend a local flood just as reliably, or at least just as scholarly as the global flood hypothesis is defended, using the same words, using the same exegesis, and so forth.
Okay. Like I said, this was going to be a lot to pack in. The time has flown by. The lesson I've learned is that, Timothy, when we have you back on, I'm going to make sure I pick one major topic and then we can dive deep into that topic. But I think it still benefits to everyone to kind of hear an introductory message of some of these concepts that they may have never heard of. I'm sure it'll whet the appetite because it's all so fascinating to me. I can't wait to dig into your book more and everything else. But again, go to timothyalberino.com, check out his book, check out being a member and the episodes that he has just for members of his travels. And so appreciate you coming on and really look forward to having you back.
So nice of you to have me on. Thank you.
You bet. Man, that went by too fast. Excuse me. I knew that was going to happen, but I really was excited to introduce you to him. There's definitely some questions I didn't get to. If there's questions this sparked for you and you'd like me to have him back on and you want to help me hone in the direction of the interview where you would like to see it taken, make sure you let me know. Also, be a part of my editorial team. I really am looking for positive news stories to integrate with the rest of my news. So you can send those to KLGetGoodNews@gmail.com. That's KLGetGoodNews@gmail.com. So I can balance out the bad with some good stuff, funny stuff, inspiring stuff. And as always, I want to leave you with hope. And I'm going to leave you with this verse of the day, Acts 17:10-11. I think with all this diving in to try and figure out what God wants us to know and in the trying to make sense of the Bible and everything, it reminds me of being a Berean. And so here it is. The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. And when they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Now these people were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. So be a Berean, examine the scriptures, be willing to dig in and see if it's so. All right. Well, thanks again for watching. And don't forget to spread the word, share with friends, get free with Christy Lee now on frankspeech.com.